everyone. Really lovely to be here with you all today. I am so excited to have a bit of a chat about Dapps and essentially what we're hoping to chat about today is building for impact. So we have Rob here from MakerX and Scott Chamberlain from Evernode. And essentially we're just this panel is really hoping to give a bit of a unique perspective on how Dapps or decentralized technologies are reshaping the way we interact with apps and maybe giving a little bit of an insight into why that's important. So not just from interacting from the perspective as of a user, but also interacting from the perspective as a developer, which Rob will also share with us. So we might just dive straight in. So perhaps I can lead off to you, Rob, for a little bit of an introduction into what you do at MakerX and what you'd like, what do you think we're missing most at the moment in terms of Dapps and how what are we missing or what product or what could we do better in developing of Dapps at the moment?
Yeah, thanks so much, Stephanie, and hello to everyone. My name's Rob Moore. I'm the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of MakerX. We're a research and development studio that helps our clients to build, digital products and ventures at the forefront of the latest technology, including Web3 and AI and all kinds of other fun things. Um, I guess, I'll answer the question from the perspective of a software engineer, I suppose. I think that in the early years of blockchain development, one of the big problems was that it required so much specialist knowledge and new ways of thinking and frankly developer tooling that was in the dark ages to be able to actually build useful applications that end users could use. And a lot of what we would see of the sort of dApps that were being built were very, very kind of technical. You had to know a lot about the underlying kind of blockchains to use them. And I think that where we need to get to and where we're starting to get to now, and certainly one of the things we're doing with some of our clients is getting to a point where everyday developers can develop dApps using developer experiences that are the same as what they would do if they were building a web app or a mobile app or whatever, and the same software quality strategies like automated deployments and testing. And that the user experiences that they're building then basically the same as what everyone's used to. And you don't necessarily need to know a lot about the underlying blockchain to get valuable, outcomes from it.
Really good point. I'd like to also introduce Scott Chamberlain. So I'd love maybe if you give us a little bit of an intro on the wonderful different hats that you wear, Scott. Then maybe have a bit of it. I think probably you'll agree with what Rob just said about making blockchain development accessible.
Sure. So my name's Scott Chamberlain. I'm the co-founder of Evernode Labs. Evernode Labs is actually a commercialisation vehicle spun out of the Australian National University, where I wear my other hat, which is I'm entrepreneurial fellow at the ANU School of Law. And for the last 6 years, I've been the recipient of a UBRI grant from Ripple Labs, which I've used to do a bunch of research in this space around blockchains and smart contracts, basically practical research. You say smart contracts can do X. Can they? Is it legally possible and technically feasible? And Evernode was the outcome of that research. So Evernode is a network, it's a decentralized public infrastructure network that dices Linux machines up into hosting slots and allows you to upload your app into multiple slots, and it provides a consensus engine inside each slot that stitches your application into a DApp. And so relevant to what we're talking about with the, giving developers the tools that they need to build dApps that aren't unusual. It means you can program your DApp in any language that you could otherwise program an app on a Linux machine. You can give it any behavior that you could otherwise give to a normal app, including read, write data, connect to external services, perform complex computations, host a progressive web app. Any geography you host it, you can host it inside nodes that only exist inside certain jurisdictions, and any scale. You simply choose how many hosts you upload your app to. So maximum flexibility, and that was the result of frustrations in trying to build use cases out of the existing tools.
Or use cases. I think that's something that every single year when we have these conferences and we talk to everybody, everybody wants to know what's a new use case and what are people actually wanting to use blockchain for. And I think perhaps both of you have a little bit of in common when you're talking about the deep inside of things. I'd love, Rob, if you could share a little bit about what you're doing with earthquakes and how your systems might actually improve how we're visualizing real life scary events.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the products that we built was the Data History Museum. It was basically looking at the concept of uh, physical historic artifacts and looking at what makes a historic artifact a historic artifact. We modeled two different properties. One of them was a causal link, so you could prove that the thing existed at the point in time that it was historic. And the second was originality, which is that it's the historic artifact, not the copy in the gift store for $20. And we realized that blockchain was the only way to digitally mimic those two properties. And so we created something that automatically creates digital, verifiably authentic digital historic artifacts. Currently, we automatically sense earthquakes that are magnitude 5 and above, and sub-magnitude 4 ones that are near population areas. And every solar flare that's detected by the satellites that NASA has up in space, including the videos of the actual solar flares. And we generate these historic artifacts in real time, which creates a causal link because the blockchain is immutable, and they get minted as NFTs, which sorts out the originality aspect. And the fundamental kind of philosophy behind this is that as our society moves increasingly to sort of digital information, some of our history is getting lost because we're not recording it physically as we did, so much back in the day. So yeah, we're trying to kind of help solve sort of some of the recording of our history, basically using this digital technology.
And so when you say we're not recording it like we used to, what do you mean by that, Rob?
So, I mean, whenever you create data and publish it, like on the internet or whatever it might be, I mean, so often that data is sort of disappearing. It's not permanent. It's not an immutable fact. You can't sort of prove that it hasn't been tampered with and isn't different from what it was when it was first published. So that's kind of what we're trying to solve, I guess, with the Data History Museum, is to create these immutable records of fact at the point in time that the historic event actually happened.
That's amazing, and I'm sure that that kind of data can go into such amazing research into the future in terms of predicting these patterns and whether also goes into kind of climate change research and things like that, and whether that might end up in a new technology again. So
Yeah.
definitely talking about building for impact, I think that both literally and metaphorically it has impact, doesn't it? Um, that's amazing. And I suppose something that when we talk about building, something I think is very, very important, previously as a VC is what beyond the tech, what are we thinking about and what is our intention behind building? And that's one of the reasons that I love blockchain and, some of its core tenets. If we look at it, we can ensure fairness and inclusivity and responsibility if we're building really well and fairly. Both Scott and Rob today have written policy on the matter. And we're lucky enough as well to be sitting with Scott, who actually had quite a bit of an impact into the submission to the Senate Standing Committee, kind of promoting Australia as a great space, great space for great Australian DAOs. So Scott, could you chat to us a little bit about why all of that is important?
Um, so the core of my philosophy is that if blockchains are worth promoting and worth making changes to the law for, it's because of their decentralization. And it's because of their capacity to be this new social scaling institution for getting more done with less. You don't need as many lawyers, accountants, bureaucrats to make stuff happen. You've got decentralized code base to make that happen. And what I pushed in my Great Australian DAO submission was trying to get the legislators to agree to provide once you've defined what decentralisation means and all of the permissionless and public and open source, it's got all of those characteristics that you provide it with a free, effectively a safe harbour where people can choose to use that tech, and you don't have legal rights and obligations intruding on how the tech works. Because the moment that you grab a decentralized system and you say, and it must also meet these standards, and it's your responsibility, Mr. Programmer, or it's your responsibility, Mr. Node Operator, to provide these standards. The moment you do that, you lose the decentralization. It becomes, you have centralizing forces, and you end up with, well, why not just, if it's my obligation to provide it, then I'm going to have to put my arm around everything. I'm going to have to own everything. I'm going to have to control everything. And maybe now it's just one machine that I run and control, and you're back where you started with a hub and spoke world where there's throats to choke, and government imposes regulation on the middleman in order to police everyone else. So I'm very big on decentralization from the point of view of Cory Doctorow coined the term the enshittification of the internet, where he spoke about this process by which people like Uber, first they become useful to customers, then they become very useful to drivers, and once they've got everyone inside their network, they start squeezing everyone, and now they're trying very hard not to be useful to anyone. That can be solved with decentralization. So we're imagining use cases where you get Uber without Uber in the middle. What is otherwise Uber is a piece of decentralized code that the various participants in the network can choose to run. You get booking.com without booking.com in the middle. You get eBay without eBay in the middle. All of these internet service, all these internet-based businesses that have become such powerful and indispensable middlemen in our lives, maybe decentralization lets us do without them. And that's the focus of what we're working on.
But I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will be saying, hang on, Scott, there's a reason why this middleman's in place. There's lots of things that go wrong in these organizations. And, if we're building things that are permissionless and we're building things without controls, how do we actually put safety and privacy, and how do we protect the autonomy that we're creating? Do you have an answer to that? I think
we do. Thank you for that setup. So it's really trivial to recreate eBay as a website. What's really hard to recreate is eBay's dispute resolution system. So back in 2014, it had done like over 60 million disputes annually. Now it's probably well over 100 million disputes that it solves. It's a platform for buying and selling goods of low value globally. Every time you had a dispute, if you had to go with a Chinese seller, if you had to fight in the local court, if you had to go to China in order to recover your rights, you just wouldn't do it, and eventually you wouldn't use it, and eBay would die. What keeps eBay going is this wonderful, highly effective, very efficient dispute resolution system that beats anything that even our governments can do in terms of small claims courts, etc. So if you were going to build a decentralized version of eBay, what you need is that dispute resolution system in the middle. And the advent of large language models, AI agents that run on CPUs, has enabled a thing we've got running called AI juries, where you can have multiple AI agents running on Evernode instances, and those AI agents working in consensus. So you can have a rule like, you are policing this website. The rule is that all posts must be about chess and they can't be rude. Here is a post that's been submitted for moderation. Is it about chess and is it not rude? And the AI agents independently form their view upon that and then meet and form consensus about that. And that becomes the way in which the platform polices itself. So we now have the potential for an incredibly powerful way for decentralized systems to self-police, because the the AI agents can work off just simple text-based rules. So the community can give it, here's our rules in text, and they get interpreted, and then over time you can adjust them, and you know, this particular post, you said it wasn't offensive, but our community regards it as offensive. Please treat, you know, here's some examples of offensive texts. And I think that is the final piece of the puzzle for these decentralized networks. And I think we really do have the tools for building eBay without eBay in the middle.
I think that it's amazing. If you think about it, I feel like the whole world is at the moment just realizing how powerful AI can be. But we're also realizing that it's not infallible either. Even with the such great models that we have, it's not nowhere near as complex as a human brain, and perhaps not as good at picking up the complexities just yet.
Well, we can make it less of a black box, right? Because the good thing about blockchain technology is, if I've got a decentralized network, I can make it open source, because it's not, I don't need it hidden behind a wall to be protected. You can compromise one, you can compromise two, but you know, I can have a Byzantine fault tolerant network of AI agents, and now all of that can be open source, and it's a lot more transparent. It's not something that one entity owns. It's something the whole community using that particular network owns. I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, and the transparency is very important, isn't it? So, I'd like to kind of throw a bit of a spanner in the works. Rob, how do you feel about a middleman?
Yeah. So I guess maybe my context here is that when I first started getting into the Web3 ecosystem, it was sort of a few years back. There was a lot of sort of um, controversial stuff happening on social media. Some people saying that it's evil, other people saying it's the best thing ever. And so I did like a really extensive research into the sort of pragmatic and ethical aspects of Web3, and I created a whole decision framework for it and a very extensive blog post. But I guess that's the lens I take to these sorts of discussions: is what's pragmatic and what's ethical. So if I look at something like a middle person, then I mean, from a pragmatic perspective, naturally, there's, this is how the way that the world has worked for a long time. It's obviously not a complete failure, and so there are some merits to it. But equally, you look at it, and then from like an efficiency perspective, for instance, like clearly there's some great inefficiencies that middle people kind of put in our lives, and that increases the cost of things. So there's absolutely a lot of benefit to try to find ways of getting rid of them. But equally, then I look at like, okay, if you got rid of them, what are the implications? You raised one before, and obviously it's the dispute resolution is incredibly important. But then there's also things like, okay, well, today if you have a complaint about something and the dispute resolution didn't work, you can go generally to the government and talk to like consumer affairs or whatever body makes sense based on the problem that you have. And there's all these, and you can go to the police if there's some sort of criminal activity. There's all these support systems in place, and so that doesn't mean that we shouldn't like pursue this ability to leverage technology to make everything more efficient and to make hopefully the overall experience better. But I think that there's obviously gradually a lot of work that needs to be done to figure out how these things kind of um, can kind of work overall as a whole solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when we're considering having a middleman or not having a middleman, I think at the end of the day, what we look back to is how it impacts the end user as well. And certainly if we looked at the tech stack that we're able to now create with blockchain technology, I think one of the things that we can all be sure of is that a lot of people are very well looked after by blockchain in typically underrepresented or underserved communities. And one of the things that I think is just so amazing is actually engaging with local customs and culture, but in a way that's tech forward, and serves the common man. And that's a financial inclusion product that Rob's making on the Stellar network. Did you want to have a bit of a chat about that, Rob?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a nice example of how we can use the technology to I guess, make the world a little bit better. And to your point, to support, financial inclusion and different cultures and that sort of thing. So we're partnering as MakerX with a couple of founders who are basically trying to take this concept called group savings that happens in Africa and certain parts of South America and India and other places around the world, where communities of people will get together, and a community could be like as small as a family unit or as large as like a whole bunch of people that live in the same area, and it could be a few hundred people or a few thousand people even. And what they do is they pull together their sort of spare money into one big pot, and essentially as a community work with each other to sort of essentially lend money for certain things, and then people will pay it back. And that ability to do that today is largely done manually with cash and stuff, and you can imagine that the scale of that and the ability to sort of manage it is really tricky, and certainly the ability to do that across country boundaries is really hard. And so that's where the Web3 technology comes in, and you can sort of transparently move money across country boundaries, keep track of it in this sort of grouped account, be able to have people to vote to allocate funds to people within the community, keep track of how much funds they've taken out and what they've paid back and all that sort of thing. And we can kind of help facilitate this amazing cultural and community process, and just make it that bit more efficient, that bit more transparent, and the ability to do it across country borders. So I think that's pretty cool.
It's amazing. And our legal counsel for today, Scott Chamberlain, do you think that this is possible, and are we able to scale this in a way that would keep up with international law?
Maybe, maybe not. What I teach my students when we talk about Web3 and we talk about blockchain, once we move to a decentralized system, something changes to the information. It becomes a lot more mechanical, a lot more real. It's not just digital anymore. So, and hence you end up with problems with blockchains. Interoperability between blockchains, etc., is a lot more difficult than interoperability between normal information systems. And the reason is that bit of data that on a single computer is just information that you can delete and put back and delete and put back is no longer just data. It's now a kind of unique form of property. And maintaining the integrity of that property across the network on which it is, and transferring it off that network and representing it somewhere else is quite difficult. And the reason why this tech is so difficult for regulators to get their head around is regulators are dealing in an intersubjectively real space. They're dealing in the law where we can agree something's real, and then we've got a middleman that goes out and tries to achieve the various outcomes for you. But it doesn't affect your rights, just the way in which those rights are pursued. So I can go to court. The current system is interested in perfecting my rights. Really granular, really ticky touchwood. You've got a consumer law problem. Let's pass more laws. Let's give you more rights, more rights, more rights. And that never solves the problem, but you've got more perfected rights, and then you've got an equally difficult system for getting it done. These networks are about delivering outcomes. And you sacrifice perfection of rights for effective outcomes. You get something that's 80, 90% correct, and all of the other use cases fall off all of the other edge cases fall outside the platform. And when you try and replicate this stuff in a way that is legally compliant with the current system, you tend to run into a problem where there's an assumed middleman that needs a license. There is someone who's got an obligation. There's a whole set of rules that are very, very difficult to automate, and they've got to be run by a person or an entity or an institution. And you end up with all of these. And cross-border currency transfers are a classic example of we care an awful. We don't care about information. We don't care that you know how to make a bomb, but we do care if you've got the funding to make a bomb. And it's very deeply policed. So there is a fundamental mismatch. Like Web3 delivers outcomes, the legal system delivers rights, and that very often clashes.
And how do you think we can overcome that, Scott?
I think so the work that I do at the uni and with Evernode is about trying to scale the justice system. I think this tech, blockchain, smart contracts, digital assets, and AI agents offers a brand new type of platform on which to run your justice system. So Richard Susskind wrote about the death of lawyers, over a decade ago, and lawyers aren't dead. We're thriving. And the reason is that the platform didn't change. The legal system runs on pen, paper, people. And if you want to automate that, you need to do what eBay did. It put its hand around the whole transaction. The customer comes in, everyone's got consistent terms and conditions, all the information it needs is on its platform. Everything it needs to automate the dispute, it's got access to, and so it can automate the dispute. It's that type of use case that I'd be hoping to get out of this tech stack. 5-10 years time, it would be nice to have, debt. You don't just automate debt recovery. You have a platform that does the whole process by which you create a debt, police the debt, repay the debt, sell the debt, enforce the debt.
Well, maybe AI jury could help with this, couldn't they? Surely, with some smart contracts.
There's no doubt that emergence of LLMs, particularly LLMs that run effectively on CPUs, has been pivotal in being able to turn this decentralized tech stack into something incredibly powerful.
Amazing. And so something, maybe if we come a little bit, zoom a little bit out, we can look at what we have at the moment. It's a little bit of a complicated landscape in DLT and blockchain at the moment. Rob, how do you see us moving forward in development and reaching out to Web 2 as the kind of messengers of Web3, and how do you think that we're able to, whether people say onboard the next billion or whether people say to expand the use of blockchain, how do you see that happening?
Yeah, so I think there's two aspects that come to mind. One's from a software developer perspective, who naturally, like, if you're not building applications that leverage the blockchain, then there's no apps for people to use. So at the very least, we need to engage software engineers. So as I kind of said at the start, I think that it's fairly simple. We need to create experiences that help us to take natural software development experiences that they're already used to everyone, and not make it complicated and have to learn new esoteric skill sets. So, two good examples that are the work we've done with the Algorand Foundation to create the AlgoKit experience, and the work that Scott's doing to make it so that you can write normal code on a Linux machine and get consensus around it. They're really good examples of taking normal software development to engineers. And then from a user perspective, like, I've always been a fan of, like, find the value in these things. Let's not focus on, speculation and stuff like that. Let's focus on real world use cases. And there's plenty of them out there to find, that are starting to come up. So, it's quite exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that you're building at the moment that I'm very excited about is decentralized identity. And I don't know if you'd like to speak a little bit about that, but I think a few of us have seen recently that decentralized identity is important, and whether that be a nation or a state hosted service, or whether that be a decentralized service, it certainly has different different impact on the end user. How do you see this, Rob? Do you see this as something that is important to be decentralized, or do you think that an identity, a central identity service managed by a government would be sufficient?
Well, interestingly, the mental model I have for decentralized identity and verified credentials is that it's essentially similar, maybe, to what I talked about before with the Data History Museum, taking a physical concept like an artifact and making it digital in the way that makes sense. Decentralized identity is actually doing the same thing, because decentralized identity is much closer to what the experience you have with a driver's license. You walk up to a pub to, prove your age, for instance, than the current way that, like, authentication works on the internet. Decentralized identity is very similar to, like, a driver's license. So it's actually a much more natural way of approaching identity and credentials and stuff like that. And it's way more powerful as a technique. Now, the key thing, though, that bridges it to maybe the way that identity is done today is that you still have to be able to trust whoever issued that credential or that identity. So government, for instance, and corporations still have a role to play because they can issue these credentials and identities, and you, as someone that's taking an identity or a credential that's provided to you by someone, you can choose to trust or not trust that credential was issued by, like, the party that it was issued by, basically, and then you can take it on face value and do with it whatever you want to do. So I think it's just the natural evolution of how this stuff should be done digitally. There's a direct bridge from the old world, if you want to call it that, to the new world. And there's a hell of a lot of really exciting regulatory stuff happening in the decentralized identity space at the moment, particularly in Europe, where they're mandating that member states within the next few years have a decentralized identity wallet. And naturally, in Australia, last year we had the announcement from the government that they're going to be adopting this technology for government identities as well. So I think it's pretty clear that it's just the future of how we're going to do identity. But the good thing is it's a much more powerful mechanism to use that's way more secure, particularly in the age of like AI deepfakes and stuff like that, than like username, password, auth, and some of the other sort of more traditional ways that we do digital identities today.
And how do you feel in the context of a decentralized identity or a state managed identity about verification using biometrics, Rob?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So look, I think biometrics are really powerful, right? Because you can kind of prove who you are. And if there's a way to use digital technology to do that, then naturally you have a stronger form of verification, if you will. I think the hard part about biometrics is making sure that they're kept private. Now, the interesting thing about decentralized identity technology is you don't have to share the underlying data, you're just sharing the proof. So you don't have to share, for instance, your biometrics everywhere. You can just share that you showed your biometrics and proved who you were to a party, and that person that you're sharing it with can choose to either trust or not trust that party. So then it really just comes down to, are you happy to share your biometrics with the company that's issuing the credential, be it the government or otherwise? And that's a personal choice, I guess.
How do you feel about this, Scott?
Well, Nick Szabo, the father of smart contracts, famously said that decentralized identity is a graveyard of failed projects and always will be. He regarded it as identity is local, it's situation specific, and you come back to exactly what Rob said. You need a trusted issuer of the credential, and at that point, it's not decentralized. You can have reusable identity. I think there's certainly room for tokenization of the effort that you've put into getting your identity verified, and therefore you don't have to do it again. So you can have this on-chain representation. You can effectively stamp people's accounts with a token that represents you are dealing with someone who's a real human being. They've been assessed as a real human being by this identity service provider on basis of a credential issued by this government. And you have various ways of interrogating that, but it's not decentralized. It's a throat to choke. At some point it becomes, if the government's issuing it, the government knows who you are and the government can choke you.
I think we've had a very interesting discussion today with Rob and Scott, and I'm sure that everyone listening will be just as grateful as I am for to have listened to such great minds. So thank you very, very much for tuning into the Digital Economy Council Australia DLT Enabled Summit 2025. This has been Building for Impact, Apps, Dapps, and Tech Stacks. So we might sign off just very quickly with Rob and Scott, and you can tell us, are you feeling overall optimistic or pessimistic or neutral about the future of blockchain in our tech stack? Rob?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah, definitely optimistic. There's a lot of really exciting legislation happening around digital currency, decentralization, and there's a relevance with AI and the concept of truth, which is something that I think blockchains can help with. So definitely optimistic.
Okay, that's one of two. How about you, Scott?
Well, thanks everyone for the opportunity to chat today. Stephanie, thanks for being such a fantastic facilitator. And I'm tremendously optimistic. A long way to go. Lots of good stuff to happen.
For me, I think that's almost a 2+ out of 2. So I'm very excited as well and very optimistic for the future. And I believe that blockchain will eventually be a core tenet in all of our tech stacks. So thanks for tuning in, everyone, and I'll see you soon.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks.